We're really happy to have, this is sort of what I consider the power of GW Real Estate, having a president of a publicly traded REIT who is an alumnus, taking an hour or so out of his schedule today from the West Coast, speaking to us. So this is really my pleasure to introduce Jeff Berkes, who's the president and COO of Federal Realty Investment Trust. Jeff will be able to talk a little bit more about his company, but some of you hopefully have shopped in their buildings locally. You've renamed Pentagon Row, so it's now, what is it, Jeff?
West Post.
West Post and Shirlington and Bethesda Row. So some of the buildings here, some of their buildings will be very familiar to you all. So Jeff is a MBA alum.
Correct.
And so I'd love Jeff to talk a little bit about his career and then certainly about running a public company like, Federal, which is, huge. And then also, since we've got the president of a retail company, landlord, love to hear your thoughts on what's going on in retail. Retail has been in the news for a decade or so. The theories of the demise of Main Street retail has been talked about for a long time, and Federal's still around. So, so Jeff, I'll turn it over to you just to sort of introduce yourself, and we'll go from there.
Okay, sure. Thanks a lot, Rob. I appreciate the introduction and appreciate the opportunity to talk to all of you. Is it standard protocol that everybody has their camera off, Rob?
Yeah, I would encourage you to turn them on because it's a little disconcerting for the speaker to not see your lovely faces. So,
well, somebody's got a pretty nice cat, it looks like, but yeah, there we go. Okay, we do have real human beings on the back side of the black square. Excellent. And, thanks for doing this a little bit later than you normally do. As Rob said, I'm out in California and I have a standing noon East Coast senior team call every Friday morning my time. So appreciate you all pushing this back to 1 o'clock East Coast time so I could do this with you this morning. As Rob said, I'm a GW grad. I got my MBA back in the early 90s, which is a long, long time ago for all of you. My career in real estate has been thoroughly enjoyable to me. And, I'm a big proponent of our business for everyone, really. And I think that's one of the great things about, studying real estate and getting into the real estate business. Because there's a lot of different things you can do in it. It's absolutely a huge business. It's a global business. And there's just a wide variety of things that you can do within the real estate business. And your path kind of depends upon, your personality and your skill sets and what interests you. Or what doesn't, and finding your fit within the business is part of the challenge we all face when we choose a career and go into it. But the thing that's cool about real estate, in my view, is it kind of doesn't matter what you're good at or what you like to do or what you're not good at. There's almost always a role for you in our business because it's so expansive. For me personally, I didn't know much about real estate when I got out of high school. I grew up in a really small town in the middle of the country, and I didn't want to go back to that town after my freshman year. And I just by chance got a job in the commercial real estate business in Denver, where I was going to college, and it was a great time to do that. There was an economic, petrochemical driven boom going on in Denver at that point in time, and it was exciting and fun, and I didn't have any better idea what to do. So I ended up majoring in real estate as an undergrad, and it's been a really, really good 30 plus year run for me in the business. And as I got more into it and more interested in commercial real estate, what I really wanted to do was be an owner. And, back in the 80s and 90s, when I was early on in my career, you became an owner one of a couple ways. That's either by being born into the business because your grandfather, father, somehow your family was in the business, and it created a lot of wealth, and you could kind of step in and access capital that way and be an owner. Or it was, my path, that wasn't my opportunity, but was to get a job with somebody that owned institutional real estate. And GW actually made that happen for me. As soon as I graduated with my MBA, I had basically a job waiting for me with a pension fund advisor back in the day, known as JMB, which has now been acquired and become part of the Heitman pension fund advisory business out of Chicago. But if you work for a REIT, you work for a pension fund advisor, you work for an insurance company, you're effectively an owner of institutional real estate, and you have to make ownership like decisions, which are vast and far reaching. And that's what interested me about our business. And the requirement to get the job, it's maybe a little different today than it was geez, Rob, I think it was, I graduated in 93, so that really is like 30 years ago, right?
Jeff, you're a kid compared to me.
It's scary. It's scary.
I know.
30 years ago, it was a requirement to have an MBA to basically get into that end of the business. And so GW facilitated that for me. And like I said, it's been a really good run for me since then. I joined Federal in the late 90s, 2000 roughly. As Rob said, Federal is a DC area-based company. We're national. We have about a third of our portfolio, a third of the value of the company, if you will, out here in California, and the rest of the company is properties are located in Boston, New York, Philadelphia, the DC area, and we have a handful of properties down in South Florida as well. We own roughly 25 million square feet of property. Our fit in the REIT landscape is as an open air retail REIT. There's kind of two classifications of retail REITs within the REIT universe. One is enclosed malls. So think about, Tyson's 1, Tyson's 2, Montgomery Mall. That's a group of REITs that are different from us. We don't own anything enclosed. Everything we own is open air. And then we also, one of our skill sets that's unique to Federal Realty, and we've been doing this since the mid 90s, starting with Bethesda Row in Bethesda, Maryland, is we've been developing, owning and operating mixed use properties. So a big part of our portfolio is mixed use. Rob ticked off the primary ones that you all could either get on the metro and go to, or ride your bike up the Crescent Trail, or get in a car and go see. But Village of Shirlington over in Shirlington, West Post on the west side of Pentagon City Mall, Bethesda Row up in Bethesda, and Pike and Rose, which is our newest and largest mixed use property in the DC area, which is in North Bethesda, right on Rockville Pike. We have a big mixed use property up in Boston, just east of Cambridge, just north of downtown Boston, called Assembly Row. And then the mixed use property that we're most known for nationally is where my office is here in California, Santana Row, which was a, no pun intended, groundbreaking sort of large scale mixed use development when it opened back in 2002. So we're going to celebrate our 20th year at Santana Row in November of this year. The company gets roughly 80% of its revenue from retail or commercial tenants, generally located on the ground floor of our mixed use properties, and then in our other open air neighborhood, community, lifestyle, and power centers. And then we get roughly the other 20% equally split between office tenants and residential tenants, or apartment renters in our apartment communities, which are integrated into our mixed use properties. Federal is one of the larger open air REITs. If you guys are interested in the REIT business, you can find all this stuff online. Kimco, Regency, Brixmor are the primary companies we compete with for capital on Wall Street. All our debt and equity is public, meaning, the equity comes from the stock market, the New York Stock Exchange, and the debt is generally from bonds that we issue that are investment grade rated. You can learn a lot about our company and others by jumping onto those companies' websites. We all publish every quarter what's called a supplemental disclosure, which tells you a lot about the company. And then every company also publishes, usually every quarter, an investor presentation, which is a PowerPoint slide deck that we use when we're explaining the company to the community that follows us, either the analysts, the sell side analysts on Wall Street, or the buy side, the actual investors that invest in the company. So I would, encourage anybody that's got an interest in the commercial real estate to spend some time, looking at the REITs. Even if you're not interested ever in going to work for a REIT, whether it's an apartment REIT, a multifamily REIT, office, retail, one of the two types, or one of the more diverse companies that might be into data centers or cell towers or something like that. There's just a tremendous amount of information online that you can learn about that business simply by reading all the documents that REITs file every quarter. So hopefully that's helpful to you as you pursue your educations. One of the things Rob asked me to talk to you about, and again, I want to make this interactive, so I'll stop talking here in a few minutes and let you ask questions, is, what does it take to be successful in our business? And I can, of course, give you my view on that, and y'all can fire away with questions when I stop talking here in a couple of minutes. But I think, when I thought about that question, I kind of break it into two main categories. One are what I would call the hard skills, and then the other would be the soft skills. And to me, hard skills, almost everything, every career path in commercial real estate requires that you do two things pretty well. And one of those is understand numbers. You kind of have to have a feel for numbers. So whether you're a developer, an investor, a leasing person, an asset manager, a property manager, real estate's a financial business, and having a feel for numbers is important. Fortunately, because I was not a math whiz in high school or in college, it doesn't require a super sophisticated set of mathematical skills, more an aptitude. So don't be discouraged if you're not a mathematician, as long as you can understand the concept of present value and IRR, and maybe do a little basic arithmetic in your head, and are not afraid of digging through numbers. There's many things you can do in our business. Equally importantly is being able to communicate. So whether that's standing up in front of a large group of people and making a presentation and getting your points across, or sitting in a boardroom with 10 to 15, 20 people and being able to speak up and speak effectively and make everybody understand what you're thinking, or, even a one-on-one at a business lunch or business dinner, the ability to communicate is hugely important. And also, obviously written communication. So if you're writing a memo to somebody, or an email, a text, or whatever it is you all use in your age group, Snapchat or something like that, being able to communicate effectively is just as important as understanding what numbers mean, and what you can pull out of a financial statement or a financial analysis. You got to be able to communicate your thoughts as well. The second set of skills I think are important are softer skills, right? So closely related to communicating is really the ability to get other people to agree with you or to convince them to your way of thinking. And that requires not only the ability to communicate, but also the ability to understand how other people are thinking and reacting to what you're saying, even if they're not saying anything. Understanding, interpersonal communication is really important. So, whether you're making a presentation in front of your investment committee to be able to buy or sell a building, or you're making a presentation to a tenant to lease space in a building, or you're making a presentation to a vendor to get them to do what you want to do as an asset or property manager, you have to get people to understand your thoughts, communicate your thoughts, and ultimately get them to agree to you. That doesn't always happen. So I think the second soft skill that's really important in our business, if you want to have a long career and you want to grow, it's ability to understand when you're not right, when you're wrong, and the ability to admit that and to learn from it and grow from it, so that you don't make the same mistake twice. You'll find as you progress in your career, whatever you choose to do, the further you get into it, the more decisions you're going to have to make, and you're not always going to be right. And some people can't deal with that. And the people that can't deal with that generally don't go very far. You have to be able to deal with being wrong, and probably more than you're comfortable being wrong. But you can learn something from anybody, regardless of who they are or what they do. And, the ability to be humble and thoughtful and get something from every interaction and use it in the next is hugely important, I think, to growing your career in any business, but particularly in our business, because it is very, very much a people-oriented business. And if you're the type of person that always has to be right and trying to force things down or through a process, it's, might work for you for a while, but won't work for you for very long. And then last, and this is a moment you've all been waiting for when I'm going to stop talking, Rob smiling. Every situation that I come across is different, right? They may be very similar, but they're all different. So you need to have a high level of curiosity, willingness to ask questions, and a desire to constantly improve. Again, a lot of the real estate business is transactional. And maybe you think that when you get something done and do it once, you can just do it over and over the same way. And that's not true. You always have to be willing to try and figure out, as nuanced as it may be, a way to do better the next time than you did in the past. And again, that's not something everybody can do. Not everybody has intellectual curiosity. Not everybody has the drive to constantly improve. But if you want to be successful, again, in most businesses, maybe any business, but particularly in this one, you've got to be willing and able to constantly up your game, because every situation is different than the last, even a little bit. So understanding that, acknowledging that, really being interested and curious about what you're doing every day is hugely, hugely important. So Rob, I don't know, that's kind of, those are my prepared remarks. If you all want to ask questions and stuff like that, I'm all ears and happy to do the best I can to answer them.
Yeah, I've got some questions in my mind, but let's see if students have some questions to kick it off. Just raise your hand or go ahead. See, I think
somebody's chatting too, Rob.
That was me. So I think we had looking for raised hands here. I think Samir had up his hand right. Go ahead, Samir.
Thank you, Rob. It's good to see you. It's good to meet you as well, Jeff. My name is Samir. I wanted to ask you, you just mentioned about the importance of exercising humility in this business. And I was wondering if you could give an example of maybe when you've exercised humility and maybe in the same breath, maybe when you've seen someone who hasn't exercised humility and how that fared for them?
Yeah, and I might not be able to think of an exactly specific example, Samir, but one of the things that we make a lot of decisions on every day in our business is how we're going to lease our properties, right? And in our space in particular, who the tenant is and what they do is hugely important. Retail tends to work best when the merchandising is put together properly. And if it's put together properly, the group of tenants is more likely to do better as a whole group than if it's not, right? So there's a lot of times when, we'll have a choice between putting in tenant X and tenant Y, and it's a bit of art. I mean, there is some hard stuff to it, the economics of a deal, right, which are kind of black and white. But there's some gray area too in terms of, is this clothing retailer or that restaurant going to be more additive to the property than the other? And that's a matter of personal opinion based on experiences and understanding of each of the businesses and all that. And it's not cut and dried. It's definitely art. So, a lot of times those decisions at our company anyway are not just made by one person. There's 2, 3, or 4 people that have an opinion, and we get those people together and debate the merits of, doing X or Y. And, even the more senior people that have been doing it for a long time are not always right. And in fact, a lot of times especially now with things changing as much as they are, I give a lot of deference to younger people because they have a different and more relevant view oftentimes than the people that have been doing this for 20, 30 years, right? So that comes up frequently for us. Can't think of a specific example off the top of my head, but that's something that happens weekly here, where we have to make a decision whether we're going to go down one path or the other with the tenant. And then you get to see, a couple of years later whether you made a good decision or not, right? Because you can see how the tenant performed, and you can see how they contributed or not to the rest of the property. So that'd be the best example I could think of for you that comes up frequently here. What was the second part of your question? I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. It was just maybe like an experience you've seen when someone maybe hasn't expressed humility, or maybe just kind of sticks to their guns, I guess.
Yeah, and again, when you make a decision, time will usually tell whether that's the right decision or the wrong decision. We have a very open culture here, a very flat organization, and there are a lot of debates. Maybe the best example would be in some of our investment committee meetings when we're talking about whether we should start a development or not start a development, or buy a property or not buy a property. And we'll make decisions more often than not the 2 or 3 years down the road, 5 years down the road with, we're very happy we made. And then occasionally we'll make a decision where, we wish we could dial the clock back and make that decision differently. And I don't want to name any specific properties, but, over my career, I've kind of been I started here as an acquisitions person and became the chief investment officer. And, there's a couple of properties that we decided not to buy that in hindsight, I really wish we would have. And there's a property too that we bought that we shouldn't have. Sometimes that can get a little heated, and people will stick to their guns maybe for an emotional reason, as opposed to a real kind of step back, take a deep breath, listen to what everybody in the room is saying kind of decision. It happens very rarely, but that's usually when something like that bubbles up, right? And they're important decisions. And it's always good to, kind of sit, listen, and take a deep breath and hear what everybody is saying, and not get too emotionally involved. Again, very, very rare, here, but when you're making the big decisions, that's when it tends to get a little bit more likely than not that somebody's sticking to their guns for an emotional reason, as opposed to something that's maybe a little bit more balanced.
Great. Okay, next question, Matan.
Hi, thank you so much, Mr. Berkes and Mr. Valero, for taking the time for this. My name is Matan. I'm a freshman. So quick question for someone who's, interested in, a finance major who's interested in, both real estate and traditional finance roles. What would you say sort of the main differences are between, this real estate asset management versus your traditional, equity fixed income asset management? Like, apart from the things being managed, what are some like cultural differences, day-to-day work differences, other big differences you've noticed?
Yeah, so good question. Real estate is still a very physical, people-oriented business, right? So if you're in our asset class, and you want to make good investment decisions, you need to get out of your office, right? You need to go spend time at the property you're thinking of investing in or divesting of, right? You need to spend time in the neighborhoods around the property. You need to spend time walking through the building, whether it's an office building or a mall or a shopping center, and kind of seeing who's coming in and out, and maybe interacting with some of those people, talking to somebody that works in a store or restaurant, or looking in the parking garage of an office building to see, are people driving nice new cars or not, or are they bicycling or walking to work, or taking public transit. How do people use the real estate? And I don't think you'd necessarily do that, or you don't do that to the same degree if you're, making a decision on a specific financial instrument, whether it be a debt instrument or an equity instrument, right? You're probably spending more time in your office, more time on your computer, and less time out and about looking at things and talking to people. I think that would be the primary difference I could think of off the top of my head. Is that getting to your question, Matan?
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yep.
Okay, I have a question in the chat box. You've touched upon this a bit, but how do you decide when to embark on new developments? Can you explain the process a little bit, your thought process as a company?
Sure.
When and where and how and what you're going to build.
Yeah, I see the, is this Trinity's question?
Yes.
Yeah. So, and part of the question too is, do clients come to you when they want to start a new development? So let me take that first. No, not really for us. And the reason why is, most of our properties are very large and have many different occupants in the buildings, whether it's a residential apartment community or a shopping center or the retail portion of a mixed-use property. There's a bunch of different tenants, and no one tenant in our business really is the impetus for us doing anything. That's not true across the spectrum of different types of commercial real estate. If you spent any time looking at a company in the logistics business called Prologis. They are a global, basically logistics company that has a lot of industrial space occupied by big users, and some of those big users are global, and so they service those clients on a global basis, based on where their clients want to be. So that business would be very different from ours, and we don't really do true ground up development, meaning we don't go out and buy a piece of land, take it through the entitlement process and build a building. We're very focused on investing in the first ring suburbs around the cities that I mentioned earlier where we do business. And generally what we do is we'll buy a shopping center. I'll give you the best example would be Pike and Rose. I mean, Pike and Rose used to be a shopping center called Mid Pike Plaza. So it was 300,000 square feet of retail space on roughly a 20-acre site. And it's been a shopping center since probably the 70s. And we owned and controlled that property for a long time. And we understood how that part of the DC metro area was evolving. We understood that there was demand for a different type of property there, including a new hotel, including condominiums, including apartment buildings, and roughly 300,000 square feet of retail. So we took that property through the entitlement process and re-entitled it from a single, I guess it was two parts over 2-story, but a 1 or 2-story surface park shopping center into a mixed-use development where everybody parks in a parking garage, either under or next to a building, and there's apartments, condos, office space, and hotel above the retail space. But that was really from studying and understanding what was happening in that community and what the community wanted and what the market could support in the way of rents that would economically justify undertaking that development. So, for us anyway, development usually comes from that, from seeing how a neighborhood or a community has grown up around one of our open air shopping centers, and then redeveloping and densifying that site over time to take advantage or capitalize, if you will, on the increased demand for different types of space in that particular location. So does that help, Trinity? I'm not sure if that's getting all the way to your question, but that's kind of how we look at it. And everybody looks at it a little bit differently, I think. And I think the Prologis example is a good contrast to our business. So we'll have 100 different tenants in a property, and no one tenant will really dictate, what we do or why we do it for the overall property. But that's much different in other people's businesses. So.
Great. Other questions from students? Oh, Siddharth, go ahead.
Hi, how are you?
Great.
Good to hear. My name is Siddharth. I'm a freshman and I'm kind of new to the real estate world. You mentioned how real estate is so global and there's so much you can do with it. And because it's so expansive, there's always a role for you. I wanted to ask, during your personal experience, how long did it take you before you found out your role in the real estate world, and how was that process of coming about finding it?
Yeah, so I didn't get a lot of advice when I was getting out of college, but I did get one piece of advice that I still remember and I think was actually really good at the time. And that was spend the first 5 or 10 years of your career not so much worried about how much money you're making, but we're thinking about what you're doing and who you're doing it with, who you're learning from, right? So again, it didn't take me long after I got into the business to know that I wanted to be on the ownership side of the business. But I started in an appraisal and consulting firm, doing a bunch of financial analysis and market analysis on properties and, writing what back at that period of time were basically these books, appraisals or, a consulting assignment response. And, I actually hated doing that. It felt like I was back in college writing a term paper every 2 weeks or 30 days. And I like the analytical part of it. I like the market analysis part of it, because I thought learning how to value the real estate was important, but I really didn't like doing the work. And I couldn't see myself doing that my whole career, but I learned from some very smart people, and I got a lot out of it. Rob and I were joking before all you guys came on that, the signing bonuses for jobs coming out of college now are about equal to what we got paid. And, my first year out of college in that job, I made $16,000 a year. So, I was, and the ramp up in earnings doing that back in the day was okay, not great. I guess you could have a nice life and make okay money, but you could never really build a lot of net worth for yourself. And I'll be very honest about it. I'm being motivated by creating net worth is part of the reason I wanted to be on the ownership side of the business. So after that, I was able to get a step closer to the ownership side of the business. I went to work for one of the big brokerage firms, the company that is now CBRE, doing investment analysis for the group of people within several CBRE offices that sold investment properties. So I was getting one step closer to the owner. The business was a fee-based business, which is, you can make a lot of money on fees, but you're really not creating any net worth for yourself in the real estate business if you're in a fee-based business, but nothing wrong with it. And that fits for a lot of people. I didn't see myself doing it long term, but what it did allow me to do was get one step closer to the transaction and actually meet people on the other side of the table that were owners of big commercial properties. So again, for me, it was a stepping stone to what I ultimately wanted to do, but not what I ultimately wanted to do. And then, I did one more step to get to the equity side of the business. After that, I moved from Denver to Washington, D.C., got enrolled at GW, and I worked as a lender. So I wasn't making equity investments in real estate, but I was making debt investments in real estate. And I did that for the 3 years while I was going to GW at night. And then, like I said, when we got started on the conversation, right when I got out of GW, I was able to go to work for a pension fund advisor on the equity investment side of the business, which was the ownership side of the business. So I finally got to where I wanted to be 8 years after I got out of college, with each successive step getting me closer. So hopefully that helps.
Great question. Another question from Trinity. Is there any overlap between the basic foundations of residential and commercial real estate? Is there fluidity between the transition from a career in one to a career in the other?
So, and Trinity, when you say residential, do you mean single family for sale homes, or do you mean rental single family homes or rental apartments? Typing away. Yeah. Well, I think there is a common denominator, and this is probably overused in our business, but it's really true. Real estate, one of the fundamental things about real estate is it's all about the location of the property, right? So there are things that apply to both commercial and single family home for sale properties related to location. For single family homes, it's more about what does the neighborhood look and feel like, and how close is it to the job center, and what's the school system like, and maybe different for an office building that's going to be leased to a bunch of corporate tenants, right? So I think fundamentally there is, but from a career perspective, I think that is a little bit of a one path or the other. You can learn the other commonality is sales skills. In both sales skills are very important if you want to do certain types of things in our business. If you want to be a broker and sell property, sales skills are transferable, I think, at the early part of your career between residential and commercial. So that would be another thing that's transferable. But I think once you get more than a few years out of school, you pick a path, and you either kind of stay in the single family for sale business, or you transition to commercial, right? And then on the commercial side, of course, now there's a lot for being in the rental housing business is one of the biggest opportunities in our business today. And that's because almost every place in the United States, every city of 1 million people or more, there's a housing shortage, right? And that housing shortage has got to get fulfilled somehow. And, most likely it's going to be fulfilled by rental housing, either apartment buildings or single family homes that are rented. That's become a very, very big business in the last decade. And a lot of big institutional money has flowed into that business. So if you're interested in the housing business, that's great, because I think that there's going to be a supply demand imbalance in that business for years to come in the United States for all kinds of reasons. And whenever there's a supply demand imbalance, if you understand something and you're good at it, you'll always have something to do where you can make money and grow in your career.
Ruben, go ahead.
Hello, and thank you for having this meeting with us. My name is Ruben. I'm a sophomore. I had a question. So I wanted to tailor it towards how you mentioned how it's important to put yourself at the property and get to know the environment. So my question is, when the company is deciding on what next they should acquire, what do you consider first, the people around the property or the property itself?
Well, I think they both kind of go together, but and I think they're both interrelated, right? But to us, the location is always the most important. So I think that answers your question by saying the people around the property, or what's going on around the property, right? The transportation infrastructure, are the neighborhoods, and I'll stick to our business shopping centers, right? Are the neighborhoods around the building or around the property, are they getting better or getting worse, right? Do people take care of their houses and yards and cars, or, is there, for an extreme example, an empty refrigerator on the front porch and a car open blocks in the front yard? I mean, clearly that's not a place we would probably want to invest. So yeah, understanding all of that is hugely important. I think the two do go kind of hand in hand a bit, but location in our business is probably more important than any other type of real estate. So, being on the right street or being at the right intersection in the right neighborhood, and if public transportation is an alternative, walking distance to public transportation is important. Certainly was pre-pandemic, and I think it will be again once we move further and further away from the pandemic. So yeah, all the locational attributes, including the people that come to the property, are of utmost important. Over time, you can always change the improvements, right? If you pick a good location and the improvements aren't quite right for that trade area or that market, that's where the opportunity lies, to create something that is right. And that takes advantage of the market demands in a given area. But if you don't have the right location, you can't do that, even if it is the right building, right? Does that help?
Good question.
Yes, it does.
Good question. Other questions from students? So far,
I have another one.
go ahead.
When I was reading on the construction of Assembly Row, I saw how it mentioned that the trust helped on improving the transportation system, on helping funding the metro. I think it was the Orange Line, Metro Line. When it comes to decisions like those, I wanted to continue, basically piggyback the question before, like, when it comes to questions like those, do you go in to that decision saying we should try to improve the environment around it on top of the deal? Because that's how it sounds like for me. Everything you've been saying is like you add value on top of properties, and on top of the properties, you're adding value around the whole like ecosystem around the properties.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. You're right. That's very important, and one of the reasons we were so attracted to buying what was called Assembly Square when we bought it, and the land around it, was that it was proximate to an Orange Line, right adjacent, not even proximate, adjacent is a better word, adjacent to an Orange Line that was in Boston's T system, which is their subway system. That was, you know, one of the main primary reasons we wanted to make the investment is we saw an opportunity there to take, you know, what for decades had been, again, a single story enclosed mall with a big surface parking lot. And, you know, we also bought some land that had a taxi cab depot on it, an old steel plant, some really crummy old warehouses that were, you know, leased to some not so great tenants. We saw all that as opportunity, and the Orange Line being a big piece of that. And we knew, again, that if we figured out what the community wanted and needed and what the market wanted and needed in the way of a piece of real estate, and we could also help deliver public transportation to the site, that we had a real winning investment. So that kind of thing is, yeah, definitely important. Definitely important.
Great. Other questions? These have been great questions.
Yeah, they have, especially for a Friday afternoon, Rob.
Yeah, and mostly freshmen and sophomores asking the questions. So just a hallmark of GW's real estate now. Another question from Trinity. Have you ever faced situations where communities were opposed to what you were doing?
So that's a great question, Trinity. And I'm laughing because they almost always are initially, right? A big part of being successful as a developer, going back to what I was saying again, you know, sort of the bucket of soft skills, is being able to sit down and talk to groups of people and explain what you think you want to do and listen to what they have to say and put that all into a package where you will get the community support to do it. So, you know, and it's just human nature, right? Whenever there's change, there are a group of people that are opposed to change. And in our business, we call that group the vocal minority. The majority of people probably would embrace the change and be very happy with it, but they're less likely to come out and say anything about it. It's the people that don't like things that are very vocal, and those are the people that you have to listen to, and you have to help them understand why you're suggesting what you're suggesting. You probably have to make some modifications to accommodate them, or help them understand why what you're doing is good for them and good for their community, and, you know, ultimately get a lot of them to support you. You know, it's the elected officials usually that are making the decision, and getting the elected officials on board is important, but most elected officials want to hear what their community that voted them into office wants before they'll make a decision. So yeah, it's rare when you walk into a community meeting and say, hey, I want to do X, Y, and Z, and everybody stands up and claps their hands and say, go, 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 do it, do it, do it. No, there's always most of the people that are heckling you or interrupting you or telling you why what you're doing doesn't make sense, because it's human nature not to embrace change initially. So that's why I said, you know, earlier that the communication skills are really important, particularly if you want to be a developer. And the biggest part of development, or one of the biggest parts of development, is being able to entitle or change the use on a site so you can build what you think needs to be built there. So yeah, I wish everybody welcomed us with open arms and hugs and kisses and bouquets of flowers or rainbows and unicorns, but it's exactly the opposite initially.
Great. Ruben's got another question. This will probably be one of the last ones. So go ahead, Ruben.
Okay. I remember you mentioned something about how the tenants that come in and you're very particular on who you say yes to.
Yes.
But I was wondering, do the tenants come to you or do you seek them?
I would guess, and I'm only guessing, that 98% of the tenants that we have in our properties that we've put in, meaning that weren't there when we bought it, are there because we wanted them to be there. and because we reached out to them and initiated a conversation with them. So if you want to create great communities, great shopping environments, whether it be a grocery anchored neighborhood center or a complicated mixed use property like Assembly Row or Pike and Rose or Santana Row, you have to be very proactive and go out and get the tenants that you want. And you have to develop a story as to why they should be there and explain that story to them and sell them on being at your property. And once they're there, you got to keep a close eye on how they're doing. And if they're not doing well, you have to be very proactive about replacing them. Apple doesn't pick up the phone and call and say, hey, we want to open a store at your property. If you want Apple at your property, you got to probably take 5 years of working with them to convince them to open a store in your property. And that's the case with most of the good retailers. You got to go get them. They don't come to you.
Great. Well, we're almost out of time. So I just want to let Jeff sort of impart any last words of wisdom. This has been a fun hour, went by very fast. Great questions, students. But Jeff, do you have any final recommendations for students?
Well, my only recommendation, and I think this applies regardless of what you want to do. Of course, we all hope you decide to select a career in the real estate business and choose that path as your career path. My one piece of advice, given that you're all, in your undergraduate years, is don't get overly hung up or bogged down on trying to find the perfect first job. Jump in, take some chances. If you have an opportunity, always, especially when you're young in the early part of your career, to take on more responsibility or do something that's a little bit different, raise your hand and do it. Don't get bogged down, and just jump in, do it. And when opportunities come up, raise your hand, step up and take advantage of them. And you'll learn a lot. You'll learn a lot quicker than you otherwise would by doing that. And the velocity of learning early in your career is probably one of the most important things you can think about. Be someplace where there's a lot going on, where you're overly busy to the point of being too busy, and just try and learn as much as you can the first few years of your career. Right. And then you can start to get picky.
Exactly. Great. Well, thank you so much, Jeff, for taking the time out of your busy schedule to speak with our students. Again, students, thanks for attending. Great questions. And I hope everyone has a good weekend. If you're here in DC, try to get out and see those cherry blossoms, but walk or bike. Don't drive. All right. Thanks so much.
Yeah. Thank you
Thanks,
all.
Jeff.
Nice chatting with you.
Great job.
You bet.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your
Thank
time.
you.